Be careful with the trauma-born empath loner, because what you're looking at is not weakness. It's a human being forged in pressure most people would collapse under, and only a tiny fraction ever come out the other side intact. You've been told your whole life that being sensitive is a flaw, that feeling too much makes you fragile, that needing space means you're broken. But what nobody ever told you is that your sensitivity was never the problem. It was the environment that forced you to develop it as a survival mechanism. A trauma-born empath doesn't learn emotions the way others do. They decode them. They read micro-expressions, tone shifts, silence, tension in a room like it's a second language. Not because they wanted to, but because at some point their safety depended on it. Their peace depended on it. Sometimes even their identity depended on it. The trauma-born empath is not weak. They are the result of an environment that forced evolution at an emotional level most people will never even come close to understanding. Because while others were learning how to express themselves, you were learning how to survive people. While others were taught what emotions look like, you were forced to detect what emotions are being hidden. And that difference changes everything about how your brain works, how your body reacts, and how you move through the world. You didn't become hyper-aware by accident. You became hyper-aware because at some point, missing a signal had consequences, real consequences. Consequences that taught you very quickly that tone matters more than words, that silence can be louder than shouting, that a slight shift in energy can mean something is about to go wrong. And when your nervous system learns that lesson over and over again, it stops treating awareness like a skill and starts treating it like protection. That's why you walk into a room and instantly feel the atmosphere before anyone says a word. That's why you can sense tension between people who are pretending everything is fine. That's why you notice the hesitation in someone's voice, the forced smile, the inconsistency between what they say and what they actually mean. Because your brain is not just listening, it is scanning, analyzing, predicting, all in real time. And people who have never lived that reality will look at you and say, "You're overthinking." They'll tell you you're too sensitive. They'll dismiss your instincts as anxiety or imagination because they are judging your depth of perception from the surface level they operate on. And they don't realize that what feels overwhelming to them is simply clarity to you. You learned early on that people are not always what they present themselves to be. You learned that love can come with conditions, that kindness can be temporary, that trust can be broken without warning. And instead of breaking completely, something inside you adapted, something inside you sharpened, something inside you said, if I can understand this before it happens, I can protect myself. And that's when your awareness stopped being optional. It became automatic. It became constant. It became exhausting. Because imagine living in a state where your mind is always one step ahead, always calculating outcomes, always reading between the lines, always asking, what's really going on here, while everyone else is just taking things at face value. That level of awareness doesn't turn off. It follows you into conversations, relationships, decisions, even moments that are supposed to be peaceful. And yet, despite how heavy that sounds, this is the part people get completely wrong about you. They think this awareness makes you fragile, when in reality, it has made you incredibly resilient. Because you've already processed layers of human behavior most people avoid their entire lives. You've already faced emotional complexity that others would run from. You've already had to sit with truths that are uncomfortable, confusing, and sometimes painful. And instead of collapsing under that weight, you learned how to carry it. That doesn't mean it didn't affect you. It did. That doesn't mean it didn't hurt you. It did. But it also built something in you that cannot be easily shaken. Because once you understand people at that level, very little surprises you anymore. You stop being easily manipulated because you can see manipulation forming before it fully reveals itself. You stop being easily deceived because you pick up on inconsistencies before they turn into lies. You stop being easily controlled because your awareness gives you options, and options give you power. And this is where your strength becomes something most people are not prepared to deal with. Because your power is not loud, it's not aggressive, it's not something you need to prove. It's quiet, controlled, and deeply rooted in observation. You don't react immediately, you watch. You don't trust instantly, you evaluate. You don't give your energy freely, you measure where it's going. And while others are driven by impulse, emotion, or external validation, you are operating from a place of internal awareness that filters everything before it reaches your core. That's not weakness, that's precision, that's control, that's survival turned into intelligence. But here's the truth that even you may struggle to accept sometimes. This level of awareness can make you feel disconnected from the world around you. Because when you see things clearly, it becomes harder to participate in illusions. It becomes harder to engage in surface-level conversations. It becomes harder to ignore red flags just to maintain comfort. And that can make you feel different. Not better, not worse, just different. Like you're experiencing life on a deeper frequency that not everyone is tuned into. And that difference can feel isolating. Because you start realizing that not everyone wants to see what you see. Not everyone is ready to understand what you understand. And not everyone is capable of meeting you at that level of depth. But that doesn't make your awareness a burden. It makes it a responsibility. Because the same ability that allows you to detect negativity, manipulation, and inconsistency also allows you to recognize authenticity, sincerity, and genuine connection when it appears. You don't just see the bad, you see the real. And when you find something real, something honest, something aligned, you value it in a way most people can't, because you know how rare it is. So no, the trauma-born empath is not weak. They are someone who was forced to grow in an environment that demanded awareness beyond their years. Someone who learned to read life at a depth that cannot be taught in comfort. Someone who turned survival into perception, and perception into strength. And the next time someone mistakes your awareness for overthinking, your sensitivity for fragility, or your depth for weakness, understand this clearly. They are not seeing you fully. They are only seeing the part of you they are capable of understanding. And that limitation belongs to them, not you. Their loneliness is not an inability to connect. It is the result of seeing too much, feeling too deeply, and understanding too clearly what most people are still trying to avoid. Because when you've spent your life reading between the lines, you stop being impressed by words. When you felt the weight of hidden intentions, you stop trusting surface-level energy. And when you've experienced the cost of giving yourself to the wrong people, you stop handing out access so easily. You were never the person who struggled to connect. You were the person who connected too fast, too deeply, too sincerely. You saw potential where others saw convenience. You gave understanding where others gave judgment. You invested emotionally where others were just passing time. And that's exactly why you had to change. Because at some point, you realized something most people refuse to accept. Not everyone values depth. Not everyone respects empathy. Not everyone deserves the version of you that gives without calculating. And that realization doesn't come from theory. It comes from experience, repeated experience, where you showed up fully and were met with half-hearted energy, where you listened deeply and were given shallow responses, where you cared genuinely and were treated casually. And every time that happened, something inside you adjusted. Not in a dramatic way, not in a loud way, but in a quiet, powerful shift that said, "This cannot continue." And that's when your loneliness began to look different. It wasn't empty, it was intentional. Because you started recognizing that being around the wrong people is far more draining than being alone. That forcing connection is more exhausting than embracing solitude. That pretending not to see red flags just to maintain relationships comes at a cost you are no longer willing to pay. So you stopped forcing, you stopped chasing, you stopped explaining your depth to people who operate on the surface. And from the outside, it looked like you were pulling away, like you were isolating, like you were becoming distant. But what was actually happening is that you were becoming selective. You were raising your standards, not in a superficial way, but in a way that protects your energy, your peace, your clarity. Because you understand something most people don't. Your energy is not unlimited. Your attention is not casual. Your empathy is not something that can be given to everyone without consequence. And once you truly understand that, you start making different choices. You start choosing silence over meaningless conversation. You start choosing distance over forced proximity. You start choosing peace over temporary validation. And those choices naturally reduce the number of people around you. Not because you can't connect, but because you refuse to connect where there is no alignment. And alignment is something you feel instantly. You feel it in how someone listens, not just hears. You feel it in how someone responds, not just reacts. You feel it in the consistency between their words and their actions, in the way they carry themselves when there is nothing to gain, in the way they treat you when you have nothing to offer. And when that alignment is missing, you don't need time to figure it out. You don't need long explanations. You don't need closure in the way others think you do, because your awareness picks it up immediately. And instead of ignoring it like you used to, Instead of giving people the benefit of the doubt over and over again, you act on it. You step back. You detach. You move on quietly. And that's where your loneliness becomes misunderstood again. Because people who operate on surface-level connections don't understand why you don't stay. They don't understand why you don't argue, explain, or try to fix things. They don't understand why you can walk away without making noise. And they interpret that as coldness, as disinterest, as emotional distance. But the truth is the opposite. You care deeply. That's exactly why you leave. Because you know what happens when you stay in places that don't match your depth. You know how it slowly drains you, how it creates internal conflict, how it forces you to shrink your awareness just to maintain comfort. And you are no longer willing to betray yourself like that. So you choose solitude. Not because it feels amazing every moment, not because it's always easy, but because it's honest. It doesn't require you to pretend. It doesn't require you to ignore your instincts. It doesn't require you to lower your standards. And in that solitude, something important happens. You start rebuilding your relationship with yourself. You start trusting your perception again. You start listening to your intuition without questioning it. You start understanding your own needs, your own boundaries, your own limits, and that self-connection becomes stronger than any external connection you used to depend on. And that changes everything. Because now, when someone enters your life, they are not filling a void. They are being evaluated against your peace. They are not becoming your center. They are being measured against your standards. They are not automatically trusted. They are observed, understood, and gradually allowed in. And that level of awareness filters out most people. Not because you think you're above them, but because you recognize what is not aligned with you. And alignment cannot be forced. It either exists or it doesn't. So your circle becomes smaller. Your conversations become fewer. Your interactions become more intentional. And your loneliness becomes quieter, deeper, more controlled. But here's what most people will never realize about you. You are not lonely in the way they think. You are not sitting there wishing for random connection. You are not desperate for attention. You are not searching for validation. Because you've already experienced what happens when you get those things from the wrong sources. You're not looking for more people. You're looking for the right energy. And that is rare. That is extremely rare. Because the level of depth, consistency, and authenticity you require is not something most people have developed yet. And until they do, there will always be a gap between what you see and what they offer. And instead of lowering yourself to close that gap, you stay where you are. Even if it means being alone longer than others. Even if it means being misunderstood. Even if it means being labeled as distant or different. Because you understand something that changes the entire game. It is better to be alone in your truth than surrounded by people who require you to live in illusion. And once that understanding becomes part of you, your loneliness stops feeling like something that needs to be fixed. It becomes something that protects you, refines you, and prepares you for connections that actually match who you are becoming. The rare 1% don't escape their pain by numbing it. They don't run from it. They don't bury it. They don't pretend it never happened. They do something far more difficult, far more uncomfortable, and far more powerful. They face it. They study it. They understand it. And then they transform it into something that works for them instead of against them. Because when trauma and empathy collide, it creates a crossroads that most people don't even realize they're standing at. One path leads to emotional exhaustion, where you give and give and give until there is nothing left of you, where you absorb everyone's problems, everyone's energy, everyone's chaos, until your identity disappears into the weight of other people's needs. And the other path leads to emotional shutdown, where you close yourself off completely, where you stop feeling, stop trusting, stop connecting, and convince yourself that isolation is the only way to stay safe. Most people fall into one of those two extremes. They either become too open or completely closed, too giving or completely detached, too available or completely unreachable. And both paths, in their own way, are forms of losing yourself. But the 1%, they refuse both. They refuse to be consumed, and they refuse to disappear. They choose a third path that requires a level of awareness, discipline, and honesty that most people are not ready for. They learn how to keep their empathy without letting it control them. They learn how to feel deeply without drowning in those feelings. They learn how to care without losing themselves in the process. And that transformation does not happen overnight. It happens in moments of realization that hit you when you least expect it. Moments where you finally see the pattern, where you finally understand why certain situations kept repeating, where you finally recognize that your kindness was being mistaken for weakness, your patience was being taken for granted, your understanding was being used as an excuse for others not to grow. And in those moments, something shifts inside you. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. You start questioning your automatic responses. You start noticing where you are overextending, where you are overgiving, where you are staying longer than you should, where you are tolerating behavior that doesn't align with your values. And instead of ignoring it like you used to, you begin to change it. Slowly at first, then more confidently, then unapologetically. You start setting boundaries. Not aggressive walls designed to push people away, but clear lines that define where you end and others begin. And for someone who is used to feeling everything, this is one of the hardest things you will ever do. Because your instinct is to understand, to forgive, to give one more chance. But now you are learning that understanding someone does not mean allowing them unlimited access to you. You start becoming selective with your energy. You stop pouring into people who only take. You stop investing in connections that don't grow. You stop trying to fix people who are comfortable staying broken. And that doesn't make you cold, it makes you aware. Because you finally realize that your empathy is not meant to be a resource for everyone. It is meant to be shared with those who respect it, value it, and reciprocate it. And this is where your power begins to take shape. You are no longer reacting to everything emotionally. You are responding with intention. You are no longer absorbing every feeling around you. You are choosing what you allow to affect you. You are no longer driven by the need to be understood. You are grounded in understanding yourself. And that shift changes how people experience you. You become calm in situations that used to overwhelm you. You become silent in moments where you used to explain. You become distant from things that once consumed you. And people will notice. Some will say you've changed. Some will say you've become different. Some will say you're not as open as you used to be. And they're right. Because you are no longer operating from unprotected empathy. You are operating from refined awareness. And refined awareness is not easily influenced. It doesn't react to every emotion. It doesn't chase every connection. It doesn't invest in every opportunity to give. It observes first. It understands first. It decides first. And then, only then, does it act. That level of control is what separates the 1% from everyone else. Because most people are still living in reaction mode. Reacting to what they feel, reacting to what others do, reacting to external circumstances. While you are learning how to pause, process, and choose your response. And that choice is everything. Because it means you are no longer controlled by your past. It means your trauma no longer dictates your behavior. It means your empathy is no longer a vulnerability that others can exploit. It becomes a tool, a strength, a form of intelligence that allows you to navigate the world with clarity instead of confusion. But let's be honest about something most people won't say. This transformation can feel lonely. Because as you grow into this version of yourself, you start outgrowing environments, relationships, and patterns that once felt familiar. And familiarity, even when it's unhealthy, has a way of pulling you back. There will be moments where you question your growth, moments where you wonder if it would be easier to go back to who you were, to being more available, more forgiving, more open without limits. Because at least back then, you didn't feel this distance between you and others. But then you remember the cost. You remember the exhaustion. You remember the confusion. You remember the feeling of losing yourself just to maintain connections that were never aligned in the first place. And that memory brings you back to your center, because now you understand something that cannot be undone. You understand that your peace is not negotiable. You understand that your energy is valuable. You understand that your empathy, when unprotected, can be used against you, but when refined, becomes one of the most powerful tools you possess. So you continue forward, even when it's quiet, even when it's misunderstood, even when it requires you to walk alone for longer than you expected, because you are no longer trying to survive your experiences. You are using them. You are no longer defined by what happened to you. You are defined by how you chose to transform it. And that is what makes the 1% different. It's not that they didn't feel the pain. It's not that they didn't struggle. It's not that they didn't face moments of doubt. It's that they refused to let those experiences turn them into something they are not. They refused to lose their empathy. They refused to shut down completely. They refused to stay stuck in patterns that no longer served them. And instead, they became something rare, something controlled, something deeply aware, something that can walk through the same world that once overwhelmed them and remain grounded, clear, and unshaken. Because they didn't just survive their past, they mastered what it tried to teach them.